The proceeding will
Order. Good morning and welcome to the Energy Security and Net Zero Committee. This is our second session on the domestic supply chains insights from key stakeholders. And we've got three stakeholders coming this morning, each having about half an hour each for their pitch and questions from the committee. We have, in reverse order, Siemens Energy, Rolls-Royce SMR, and Associated British Ports. And with Associated British Ports today, we have allow you to introduce yourself, as I always do, name, rank and serial number.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. My name's Andy Reay. I am Head of Offshore Wind at Associated British Ports and also Director of Renewable UK, which is the offshore wind industry body.
Great pleasure to have you here. Thank you very much. We'll start off with what you see, how you see the world, the lie of the land, if you like, and then we'll come in and maybe ask some questions.
Excellent. Can I give a brief introduction to ABP for those who aren't fully aware? ABP is the largest port group in the UK with 21 ports around the UK, providing services for about a quarter of the nation's seaborne trade. We employ over 2,000 people in the UK and support in excess of 200,000 jobs in the wider economy across our port infrastructure. We are an existing major provider of renewable port infrastructure to the UK, most notably with our joint investment with Siemens Gamesa up on the Humber through the Greenport Hull blade factory. We believe that ports are going to be vital as part of the energy transition to net zero. A lot of what is happening in terms of the routes to decarbonise the UK economy, including hydrogen, CCUS, offshore wind and specifically floating offshore wind, all happens in and around port infrastructure in the UK. So we firmly believe that port infrastructure is the key enabler to that net zero journey and facilitating. From an ABP's perspective, we recognise our role in this net zero transition, and we over the last year have developed our Ready for Tomorrow strategy, which is our sustainability strategy over the coming years. We have approved £2 billion worth of investment from our shareholders in order to facilitate not only the decarbonisation of our own operations in ports, but 1.4 billion of that is to help facilitate the decarbonisation of our current customers on our port estate and our future customers in ports such as Port Talbot. We anticipate that port infrastructure is going to be vital to the decarbonisation journey for the UK. And in terms of helping to facilitate that port investment and hence the wider supply chain, we believe there are three key priorities, what we're terming the 3 Ps. The first one is pipeline. We need to see consistent, regular pipeline of projects becoming available in the market, specifically in terms of offshore wind and floating offshore wind, to ensure that our potential customers, who are the supply chain organisations and the tier 1 fabricators and manufacturers, so that they have the confidence to then use our facilities. But we do need the facilities to be there in the first place to enable these tier 1 contractors to come locate. So having a pipeline of projects is absolutely critical. We're starting to see that emerge in the Celtic Sea in the form of the Crown Estate's 4.5 gigawatt auction process, which has just kicked off. And we are looking at how we can invest in excess of 500 million in our port in that region, Port Talbot, to support the supply chain and those developers to deploy that 4.5 gigawatts. But port investment is over a longer time frame than just 4.5 gigawatts of delivery in 2030 to 2035. We are investing for decades, and therefore we need to see consistent policy and market development, particularly for offshore wind, over the next 10, 15, 20 years. And then it's only in that environment where we can create a business case in which to then leverage in our shareholders' capital to make these significant investments of in excess of 500 million, for example, in Port Talbot. So that's pipeline. Second P is around industrial policy. what we're seeing at the moment is that the market, particularly in terms of offshore wind, is being driven by the CFD mechanism, and that single policy mechanism is being asked to carry the burden of not only delivering the cheapest green electron, but also being expected to deliver supply chain development and other economic value, local content from the same policy mechanism. We believe there should be other policy mechanisms specifically designed to encourage certain outcomes. And if we recognise that supply chain can only come to the UK when it has somewhere to come to, a physical location, which is the port infrastructure, that investment in port infrastructure has to happen significantly in advance of any market signals from the specific customers, so up to 7-8 years in advance of the actual demand. Therefore, there's a market failure between the point where the port needs to invest and we get commitment from the supply chain or the tier one or the developer. And it's this region where we need to create some new policy mechanisms to help port investors through that transition. My final point is around picking winners, and I don't mean picking individual company winners. I mean picking strategic locations in the UK which can become the natural home because of their existing infrastructure or their proximity to market, becomes the natural home for these new emerging industries such as carbon capture and storage, green hydrogen and offshore wind. We're already starting to see clusters form in and around the Humber. Because of the ScotWind leasing process for offshore wind, we expect a cluster to form in the Scottish market, and the Celtic Sea, we expect a cluster to form in and around the Celtic Sea to deliver this. But we need to be strategic around that. We can't allow those individual regions to be competing with each other. We will need it all, and we almost need to now at this early stage start to pick winners, regional and industry winners, to help deliver that net zero journey. A key element of that, I think, are schemes like free ports, which is a process by which we've selected some regional winners, but also schemes like Elmes and Flomis. So the competition for the Flomis grant to support floating offshore wind port infrastructure, that effectively the outcome of that will help us to focus on specific regions and specific port locations to help the supply chain come and locate in that area.
Excellent, thank you very much. And ahead of time as well, always appreciated in select committees because members will take up the time. I've had two indications straight away, so I'll go straight from what I was indicating. Mark Hendrick and then Mark Garnier.
Yeah, thanks. Two questions really. One, the reason for the choice of location in Port Talbot, and two, are there any reasons, perhaps the state of the steel industry in Port Talbot, but also other firms in the area that could significantly contribute to the sort of supply chain issues that you raised?
The reason Port Talbot in particular is critical to specifically the delivery of the Celtic Sea is that there is already an amount of port infrastructure there. So there is a tidal port built back in the 1960s to allow very large vessels to come and deliver coking coal and iron ore to the steelworks there. So we have the start of what is the type of port features, deep water in a relatively sheltered area, in close proximity to the market. So we have the starting point is there. But what it does need is it needs heavy lift keys and it needs investment to bring it up to the specification that's required to deliver floating offshore wind. So that's partly why we've selected Port Talbot as the location, because we've got a great start, it's kicking off point, and yes, it does need more investment. There are other features around Port Talbot. It's an industrialised area already. The existing steelworks supports in excess of 10,000 jobs in the local economy. So we've got the type of steel fabrication and supply chain in the kind of tier 2 level already present in the area. So we think we've got the right physical features in the port. We think we've got the right human resources in the wider economy, and we think we've got what is the starting point of the supply chain to deliver the floating offshore wind structures which we're looking to build out of Port Talbot. To come back to your point around the steel industry, I think we've all heard some recent announcements around the trajectory for the blast furnaces in that area. We at ABP believe that we need to work with the Welsh Government, the local authorities and national government to give that region, which is already one of the most deprived in the UK, give that region the opportunity to effectively have something to work towards over the next decade. If we walk away from this opportunity now in that region, then there will be significantly more deprivation, and it's difficult to see. Floating offshore wind provides the fantastic opportunity to repurpose all of that industrial capacity and all the human resources in that area.
Thank you. Mark Darren.
Thank you. That was a very helpful introduction. Can I just sort of turn to your second point, where you were talking about sort of market failure to do with the way the structure works and your investments? So I spent 17 years as an investment banker raising money for exactly this type of sort of port facilities and stuff. And I completely get your point about how you can, if you are an offshore wind generator company and you see a CFD, are you going to bid for that CFD if you don't know that you can build those, or you've got uncertainty about where you can build your plants? But what I'm sort of trying to get to the bottom of is, with investment, to a certain extent, there's a bit of chicken and egg. And the argument can go that if you take that commitment, actually the customers will follow. What I'm sort of trying to get some more flavour on is where you can provide evidence of market failure. So can you sort of say that because the ports aren't there and that ability to build these wind turbines and then service them, because that's not there, that the CFD market has failed and people haven't then invested into it. So actually the problem is much more pronounced than perhaps you're talking about in terms of just a simple investment case.
I think what we've done is we've looked at the pipeline going forward and the ever-increasing size of turbines, and some of the turbines which have already been sold, which will be delivered over the next few years, are already larger than the ones which we've currently installed. So when we look ahead, even over the next 5 to 7 years, we know that the port infrastructure in the UK will struggle to meet the loading requirements and the capacity requirements.
That gives you certainty of investment. So your investors can turn around and see you've got a market failure in terms of that, and therefore there's a good case for building it in order to be able to deliver that.
I think because the CFD happens so close to the construction period of the offshore wind farm, it's difficult for us to get commitment from a customer in advance of them having taken their own FID.
You got anything else? Are you happy?
Yeah, no, there was there's just one thing, just a bit of clarity. So I might have just zoned out momentarily talking about it. On the picking winners, are you saying it's a good idea that we should be picking winners in terms of the regions, or a bad idea? I just missed that point.
I think we need to strategically select locations where multiple elements of the net zero journey can come together.
This is a good idea.
Yes, and
System brain.
Yeah, exactly.
Mark Bosey.
I wonder if I could ask you to clarify a little bit what exactly needs doing at the ports to enable the activities to take place. You spoke a bit about heavy lift capability, for example, so I understand about that. But in most cases, these ports exist. Presumably, in most cases, there's developable land for manufacturing around them. So, what is the investment going to be made on? And the other, to follow that up, then is we've heard in this inquiry a lot of issues about the challenges of getting stuff through the planning system. Does the work that you would intend to do, will that require planning? And in the main, is there support from the local authorities in the areas where you're intending to do it, or do you see planning as an impediment to delivering what needs doing at scale to enable us to meet our decarbonisation objectives?
Questions?
In terms of the port infrastructure, Yes, we do have existing port infrastructure, but it doesn't have the current capability to deliver what we predict to be the weights involved.
What physically do you need to do to the ports to enable?
You need to improve the load-bearing capacity of the heavy lift quays, so that's one feature. But what we're also discovering is that the component, the scale of the projects means that you need significantly more storage land in and around, in close proximity to the quay, to allow it to efficiently deliver the offshore wind project. Okay. And that's particularly relevant when we look at floating offshore wind. Floating offshore wind, particularly for the large foundation structures, needs an order of magnitude more land than you would need for a comparable fixed bottom.
Okay. And the land exists around your existing locations?
But just having land still needs investment in the land, because we need to raise the load-bearing capacity, we need to prepare it for the structures.
And in the absence of these engineering works you're telling us about, are you suggesting that we're not going to be able to deliver, or some of the other witnesses who have got projects aren't going to be able to get those away because the ports will be inadequate if they're not amended in the way you describe?
It's a combination of lack of capacity, but also lack of capability in certain port locations.
The planning question.
Planning, our concern is that port infrastructure investment, the planning process to deliver that rightly has to consider a lot of parameters, but the timescale which it takes to go through that process is significant.
Is that going to be an impediment? Is the amount of time it will take to get the ports in good order going to impinge on our ability to deliver renewables at scale?
There is a risk, because we're having to start that consenting process so far in advance of the market signal, and it can cost significant amounts of money to go through the consenting process. So we are effectively spending money at risk before we get a strong market signal. Therefore,
why you want your 3 Ps?
Yes.
Yep. Okay.
Lovely. We've got 4 coming in. Barry, Mark Hendrick again, Mark Carney perhaps again, and myself. So Barry first.
Thank you, Chair. We're always so surprised when someone writes to us and says, actually, public funds should not largely be focused on ports.
Yeah, that was a surprise.
That we sometimes are so happy about that we ignore some of the other things in the submission. And it seems to me that, yeah, you may not want the money, but boy, do you want autonomy here. And all the stuff that you've put in your submission about planning, your comments about the free ports, an expansion of permitted development rights into the ports, a system of self-certification once mitigation measures in respect of environment ecology are agreed, with a cost ceiling measured against the total cost of the development. It seems to me that you want a very free hand and no constraints from planning. So you really are asking government for a lot here in terms of stand back, we'll get on with it, but you want the government funding to go into the penumbra, the supply chain, and you also mentioned in your oral evidence that you wanted government to step into that space, that gap that you said there was, a severe gap, with new policy levers. What are those new policy levers? And am I being overly suspicious about just how much freedom you want in your free port structure from any other environmental constraints?
Can you answer those 75 questions as quickly as possible?
I don't think our comment was specifically related to free ports. What we want are the environmental considerations to be considered at the outset, which then gives us a window within which we can operate. So we don't mind having parameters set, but once those parameters are set, then allow us to deliver the investment, the supply chain, the building size.
Don't change the goalposts halfway through.
Exactly, and don't adapt those conditions as we go forward. What we want is an envelope within which we can operate, and we're quite happy for or various stakeholders, government, local authorities, etc., to set that parameter. Once all the environmental considerations are taken, but once they're set, allow us to kind of get on with the business of bringing in the supply chain.
But you know already what the statutory biodiversity net gain is, what all of these things are. So what in particular are you pushing for? It's not as if planning regulations change in that way when a project's been approved. I'm not quite sure what your fear is here.
I think, if you don't mind, I would like to, I haven't got that information to hand, and it's not my particular area of expertise, so if we could provide a written response on that would
Evidence is evidence, and
what about the policy levers that you want government to bring in to mitigate that gap? What are they?
I think it's been a welcome. The Flomis scheme, for example, has been a welcome intervention into the market. I think the government did recognise that there was a failure here of these port projects being developed, and therefore the scheme was very much focused on floating offshore wind port projects. So schemes like that, some form of enduring scheme to help strategic port projects go through that initial period, because once you've got your consent in place, you can then make quite rapid decisions around the construction process, and you can have them constructed in a timely manner.
Well, we're going to hear this afternoon from the Minister and from Ofgem, and I presume we'll be chatting with them about the new National Energy Systems Operator and the strategic plan that they've got to come up with. Now, they'll be in place supposed to be by summer this year, fully operational, but their plan is not going to be ready for a little while. What are the delays that you envisage with the new NISO, and how is that going to affect the timely delivery of the sort of clean energy that you are building this infrastructure to get?
Okay, that's another topic which I'm not particularly fully up to speed with in terms of grid and future network operator. If we could provide written evidence on that in the future, then.
Thank you. Move on to Mark Hendrick.
You mentioned the heavy lift requirement that's obviously going to be needed at Port Talbot. Two questions again. Clearly, things like blade manufacturer. You said you didn't want the regions competing with each other, quite rightly, because there should be the capacity there to meet our net zero targets in terms of the wind energy contribution. So is it your plan to transport a lot of the stuff from the northeast, where there is that manufacturing capacity at the moment, to Port Talbot, or are you looking to make it more localised, such that a lot of the facilities you've got in the northeast for things like manufacture of really heavy steel products should take place in the Port Talbot region itself, rather than being shipped right across the country from the northeast to South Wales?
I'll let Siemens Energy comment on the blade transportation during their evidence. There are strategic locations in the UK which have a natural affinity to certain, so the Humber, for example, they manufacture blades and they export those blades back into Europe. They provide them to UK projects, and I can entirely see a world whereby they are shipped around to a port location in the Celtic Sea. What we don't currently have at sufficient scale in the UK is the ability to assemble and build the kind of subcomponents for the foundations for floating offshore wind. So if we recognise we do need a new facility to be able to do that, then we should do it as close to the relevant market as possible. Acknowledging that there may well be capacity on Teesside to manufacture some of the subcomponents and then transport them around to other locations. That is in effect how the current European sort of manufacturing supply chain works. They ship components around to where they're needed. You don't build a nacelle factory in every single region to deliver the offshore wind in that region. You build them in certain locations, and then that becomes the strategic hub from which you distribute components to elsewhere. But what I would say is that for the construction phase of these projects, it's vitally important that you have local port infrastructure to bring all of those components together and then install them offshore.
It's a very slightly random question. The port of Alastair, I keep hearing people talking about the opportunity there. This is the one near Inverness. Have you ever looked at it? And what's wrong with it? Why do entrepreneurs keep coming in and looking at it, and the serious guys like you ignore it?
I wouldn't like to comment in any detail on that, but
you're obviously aware of it, though.
I am absolutely aware of it, and we have taken an option on a piece of land up on the Cromarty Firth, in addition to Ardazir and the port of Cromarty. ABP, we understand floating offshore wind very well through our interaction with developers and the wider supply chain. We feel we have a very good view as to what is required from a floating offshore wind construction hub port. We absolutely believe Port Talbot is needed in the Celtic Sea to deliver that. We haven't quite made our mind up what is needed in and around the Cromarty Firth to deliver.
Thank you. Similarly, in Stornoway, in my constituency, they're building Deepwater Port at the moment. It started off with cruise liners, but there's a flow misinterest, and there's a steel fabricators next door to the yard in Arnish, which I'm no doubt you'll know about as well. But what I was going to ask you was, over and above that, elsewhere, this is a model you're talking to us about Port Talbot. Where else in Europe is this happening? I'm imagining that this is an idea that's not brand new. It's not the first time this has been done in the world or in Europe. This is a new one for the UK, is it?
There is a whole network of fixed bottom offshore wind ports in and around Europe currently. Eschberg, the Humber, Ostend, Cuxhaven. There are a whole host of them. But in terms of floating offshore wind, proximity to the final location is even more critical.
Construction's a cost saver.
Yeah.
Okay. You'll fabricate close, and then you'll move the stuff as little distance, and you'll then anchor it.
Because you have to tow it from that port location into its final location. And to your comment, France at the moment, in Brest and Cherbourg, have already invested in port infrastructure to help them deliver the French floating offshore wind, which will come online over the next 10 years.
When I look at the map and when I see what Port Talbot is, and I see that you're talking to the Celtic Sea, I notice that Ireland, of course, is in and around that geography as well. You've got an eye to what the Irish government might be doing as well to develop or to use Port Talbot for fixing things in Ireland, in Irish waters.
When we look at the business case for Port Talbot, we absolutely see it delivering not only the UK Celtic Sea, but also potentially providing services into the Irish market and potentially back into the French market as well. Yeah. But I think what is absolutely critical for the UK is that we take first mover advantage. We have an opportunity to invest in a port and it to become the focal point of the entire Celtic Sea region. And once it becomes a focal point, the manufacturing and the supply chain, then we have the momentum to attract that into the region.
I've got you a big message on pipelines, industrial policy, and the pick winners, which time's not really allowing me, but I will investigate with others as well. I imagine the message is going to be similar. I think there was one other point, and one of you Barry wanted to raise a brief point. You've got a minute, Mr.
Gardner. Unlikely that CFDs or SIR awards will be sufficient to drive supply chain investment. Why and what more do you think is needed in order to do so?
Those two in isolation, we don't believe send the right signals to the market. But once you combine them with things like the IGP, the Industrial Growth Partnership Programme, and the Giga scheme, that all of a sudden then appears to be quite a significant package of support for the supply chain. So in isolation, just having a CFD mechanism doesn't in itself encourage supply chain. You need these other policy mechanisms all working in harmony towards the same goal.
Again, was there any fear that the others would be withdrawn or taken away? Or I'm not quite sure why you focused on them being insufficient on their own. What was behind you saying that?
From a port's perspective, because we need to invest significantly in advance, that is the reason why we don't see market signals from CFDs helping us 7 years in advance.
It's system brain rather than
the point we talked about earlier,
rather than the blind hand of the market or whatever it is. Thank you very much for that, Andy Reay from British. Associate British Ports, thank you, ABP. Now, seamlessly, like a Rolls-Royce engine that's well-oiled, we're going to move on and have Rolls-Royce SMR in the panel in front of us. I've been waiting all morning to say that, so thank you, Rolls-Royce.
What's most important, the oil or the engine?
Oh, I would say the engine.
What type of engine are you talking about?
Rolls-Royce.
What type of Rolls-Royce engine are you talking about?
Not one in your Bentley, anyway.
You know they haven't made cars
Nestle for you.
40 years.
I've got an old engine because they were so good they lasted forever. Thank you very much for that swift changeover. Can I ask you to introduce yourselves from Rolls-Royce SMR? Name, rank and serial number. Start on my left.
Morning, Chair. Alastair Evans. I'm Director of Corporate Affairs for Rolls-Royce SMR.
Good morning. Rich Everett. I'm the Group Head of Supply Chain for Rolls-Royce SMR.
Great.
Hello, I'm Victoria Scott and I'm the Interim Chief Manufacturing Engineer for Rolls-Royce SMRs.
Brilliant. You're starting your 10 minutes bang on time. On you go.
Good morning. Let me provide some introductory comments and then I'll pass over to my colleagues to talk about their areas of expertise. Thank you for the opportunity, Chair, to talk to you all this morning. Let me give a quick status update. So Rolls-Royce SMR are in a procurement process. That is why we have marked our evidence as not for public dissemination, but we will of course endeavour to answer as many questions as fulsomely as we can today. Safe to say that some of the information that Rich and Vicky are working on obviously has implications for the submission we will make to the Great British Nuclear Procurement process. I will of course, like my expert who led earlier, Andy, start with 3 key points. We've got a once-in-a-generation opportunity with Rolls-Royce SMRs and SMRs as a whole. We've got a blank sheet of paper on which we can design what the supply chain needs to look like and how we can most efficiently and effectively ensure that the UK secures its maximum opportunity for the deployment of SMRs at home and in our project through export. It's a significant market. It's estimated at sort of £250 billion plus globally. And we are talking to multiple countries, as you will all know, about potential opportunities. This is an opportunity to revitalise the UK supply chain, and we want to create an enduring supply chain. And what do I mean by that? We need to identify those match-fit players who can be with us from the start and those that we can work with over time to develop. But the aim here is to create an enduring supply chain. Otherwise, as you begin to export and you localise content, each project becomes almost a first of a kind again. We don't want to do that. We want to have an enduring supply chain from the off. So first point, once in a generation opportunity, let's get it right from the start. How do we do that? Again, as you will have heard notably many times, programme and project certainty. So I've worked in the large nuclear space in a project that didn't go forward. We spent 4 or 5 years preparing the supply chain, asking them to invest, preparing their codes and standards and investing in their abilities, and those projects failed. They didn't go forward. So we marched the supply chain up the hill and then pulled the rug from under them. We cannot do that again. Clearly, Great British Nuclear has recognised that, and they are seeking to give project certainty through the procurement of reactors. That's a positive, and that means that suppliers like that, many of which that Rich and Vicky speak to, can invest with confidence. So we do welcome that. And then finally from me, there's a key point about levelised cost of electricity versus UK content. Where does the decision making sit for this? If you go and have a conversation with the Treasury, you will of course want the cheapest possible project. You go and speak to different parts of government and they'll want to maximise UK content. Is this about industrial strategy and maximising UK content, or is this about the easiest, cheapest, fastest route, which would have a higher overseas content, for the simple reason that many of those overseas players have been producing the goods and services that we will need for decades, whereas in the UK we're having to start it up again. Perhaps that's the moment for me to pass it to Rich, who does engage with the supply chain on a daily basis.
Good morning, thank you very much. So, as my role as Group Head of Supply Chain for Rolls-Royce SMR, it's my responsibility, accountability to source all components that's going to be required to be delivered to UK and also international markets. So as part of my role, I spend a lot of my time assessing and evaluating the capability and capacity supply chain, both in the UK, in the European, and also into the international markets as well. It's our business, it's our focus on maximising UK content. Currently, we believe we could hit up to 80%, but that is not without significant challenges as part of that activity, especially not with regards to a first of a kind or first unit. The more likely figures is approximately around about the 60 to 70%, but once again, that's not without its own challenges to do so. And this is where there is a requirement for supply chain intervention, both from industry and also from government. So when I talk about supply chain capability and capacity, we do a very, very detailed analysis of the available or capable supply chains to us today. And we identify them as organisations that have got capability today. And those sort of products or components that we're talking about there are things like non-nuclear components, module productions, nuclear valves, and also sort of some electrical control and instrumentation commodities. Then we have areas where there is no capability to date in the UK, and that is for things like steam generators, steam turbines, and sort of complex nuclear components as part of the reactor components. And that means what our aim is to focus on everything that's in the middle. And this is where the greatest area of opportunity is to maximise those contents within the UK. As part of that process, we also understand what the value is, because this is about ensuring that when you identify and develop a supply chain, you develop that based on their ability to be able to supply, not just for the first of a kind, but also for the multiple units and fleet approach as part of that activity. And then what that allows us to do is then work and engage with those supply chains to allow them to prepare and to be able to access those markets as well as part of the standard bidding processes that we go through. Why do we see ourselves in this point today is historically, and probably for the last number of decades, the UK nuclear industry has been supporting projects, and those projects are piecemeal and other sort of more bespoke decommissioning activities for that. So my last point is on, as part of my role, I'm also speaking to international organisations, and those international organisations have they make and manufacture components in the European Union and also wider afield, and they all have expressed an ability or desire to potentially support or manufacture in the UK, subject to the right investment programme or their ability to invest in that process. I'd like to hand over to Vicky, please.
Excellent, thanks, Vicky.
Thank you. Thanks. So as my role as Interim Chief Manufacturing Engineer, my role covers responsibility for internal manufacturing development, and that includes the associated factories for those products. And that forms part of the wider supply chain solution into the SMR. We're currently developing in-house the manufacture for some of the systems that contain some of the highest integrity requirements for the power plant. And this is extremely important that we maintain this, and our aim is to build these in the UK. What we need, though, is, as Alastair mentioned, is that commitment to the project so that we can continue with the investment that's required. And that includes both for continuing the manufacturing development and moving that forward so that we've got a production-ready solution for the factory. It also includes the site selection for the factory, understanding where we're going to place that site. We can't commit to a site until we've got that level of commitment elsewhere. And once we've got that site identified, it then enables us to properly engage with training partners within that region, because we need a significant number in the region of 330 employees within this factory in the first instance to deliver that capability in the UK. And we need 4+ years to be able to develop those programs and also train apprentices through those schemes as well. Beyond that, it's then obviously really important that we can continue quite quickly now with the design of the factory itself, so secure investment and funding for the design of the factory, and then ultimately the build of the factory and its delivery to the programme within the UK. Thank you.
Excellent, and finished ahead of time as well. Thanks very much, Vicky. Just before I turn to some colleagues, two questions I can forward. Firstly, Vicky, what you're saying there, it seems like quite a job of, it's almost like an orchestra conducting. You've got to get a lot of moving parts coming together before you can make these decisions. That's not easy. You're needing signals. The biggest actor in the government often talk about market forces, but you seem to be suggesting that government's got to realise it's the biggest force in the market and really make clear signals.
It is for us, right now it is, yes. We're moving forward with the investment that we've got at the moment through the current phase, but obviously we need that commitment beyond to then engage properly with the external parties that need to invest, so local authorities and other organisations that are going to support us through the construction and development, as well as the actual manufacturing development as well.
And just to add, if I may, Chair, Vicky's absolutely right. So my job is to engage with the board on making the case and explaining that they should have the confidence to invest, and that's where Great British Nuclear is getting to in its procurement.
And quickly, one of you two, either Alastair or Rich, mentioned UK content can be more expensive, you can get cheaper elsewhere, but you seem to be hinting that if you start making it in the UK, it will become cheaper over time. Yeah, am I seeing nods on that one?
Yes,
absolutely right.
Okay, Barry Garner. Thank you.
It's Friday evening, and
the week's gone.
Travelling in time.
I've just finished doing the resurfacing, but they've got some excess shingle. And they come into you and they say, you know, we've got to offload this shingle. Would you like your drive done? And we can do it cheap for you. But you've got to have it now. You've got to make the decision now. Because, you know, we've got to go and it's the weekend coming up. And when you tell us, not only we can't make this decision without a contractual commitment from government, and a commitment to any more than 2 designs in the GB nuclear process in the immediate term will begin to dilute the benefits, I begin to feel like the householder who has just had the contractor come and knock on my door and tell me I need my driveway done. So why, given that you started off, Mr. Evans, by saying this is a great opportunity, we're at the forefront of the technology, but you concluded your remarks by saying, actually we're playing catch up with the rest of the world here. They're way ahead of us on many of these things. Mr. Everett, you laid out very well, I thought, the hugely complex supply chain that we need here, but you didn't talk about the skills supply chain, and I'd like to hear where we are on that. But most of all, I want to know that you're not really trying to hold a gun to the government's head here and say, you've got to decide now, it's got to be us, and it's got to be nobody else but us, otherwise you'll lose the benefits of what could potentially be a great British success story.
Let me try and pick up on that latter point.
Can we answer
first?
Quicker than the question?
Okay. My team here can't do their work until there is certainty, because Vicky can't go to the market and secure a site, and Rich can't go and procure long lead items until there is certainty. And that's why I wanted to make the point about large nuclear projects failing, because there was that significant ramp up in activity and the projects didn't happen. So that's where the certainty comes from. Why is it, I won't use your language exactly, why is it important that we do it now? Well, because we're ready. And we're in a global race. So we are competing against US and French technology in a global market in many countries in Europe and further afield. And we need to make progress in our home market. And essentially, Mr. Gardner, we've got a tremendous opportunity to do something here.
I agree with you, but there are going to be costs, aren't there? And I want you to be upfront with us about that.
There are.
I also want you to be upfront about what the risks are, because we haven't.
Sorry. Yep. Okay.
Yeah, I'll pass on to colleagues about way. So I think it is important to say, you mentioned that overseas countries are way ahead. That's probably not quite the right characterisation. We are competing to secure contracts in a number of countries, and exactly right.
Derek Thomas, do you want to come in?
Yeah, great. On that one, what I would answer that question is because it was the government, George Osborne, that fired the starting gun and challenged you to do this in the first place. So I've always been supportive right from that date of the SMR potential for the country. Can you set out a bit, and I might have just not understood what was said, probably to you initially, Mr. Evans, the UK energy supply, what share of the demand will this deliver, or could it deliver, and what would the impact be on customer pricing, assuming maybe that pricing changes as it is now? But also energy security, will a small, modular reactor actually make our energy more secure, because there's lots of them rather than one or two big sites? And then can I quickly move on to UK PLC? My understanding when we talked about it years ago was actually the opportunity for export of both the energy and IP and technology was significant for the UK, and is one of the reasons why government should bite your hand off. Can you say a bit more about those two things, or whoever can?
Yeah, let me quickly pick on the first ones, so I'll try and be as brief as possible. 470 megawatts per reactor, that's a power for about 1 million homes. So they are pretty large entities. Yeah. They're sort of very similar to the AGRs that are existing in the UK. Already stable supplies, 60-year operational life, and you would put multiple small modular reactors at each site for the simple reason, again, as colleagues earlier were talking about planning, the planning process for one SMR is largely the same as it would be for 4 on the same site. So if you're going to go through the process, you would want to build 2, 3, 4 reactors on one site. And your second point was on...
Well, I'll ask quickly about the impact on consumer price.
We've got nuclear has no automatic right to be in the mix. It has to be competitive. The first of a kind, to Mr. Gardner's point, it will cost more. The first of a kind will cost more. The aim here is replicability. Your second is cheaper, your third is cheaper, your fourth is cheaper, and on you go. Because you've invested in the factories and because you've invested in a sustainable supply chain. So the aim here is to, I don't want to sort of throw numbers around, that will be an element of the Great British Nuclear process. And if we are not offering value for money, we will not secure contractual commitments from the government rightly.
The second point was then about, so have we lost the advantage, or is there still an opportunity for UK PLC to benefit from export in several different ways, really?
Absolutely. I think this is where I mentioned that, where I identified where we have no capabilities because we missed out on that opportunity because those markets, the US and French markets have already taken some of those activities. There's still 80% capability that we want to and have the ability to be able to develop. That is in the sort of the highly complex, high-skilled technological jobs that we could do. So, and the approach is we don't want to create multiple supply chains in multiple regions. This is about developing an international supply chain that can supply internationally.
Great, thanks, Jim.
Thank you. I've got Dr. Dan, Barry, and possibly myself coming back. Dan Poulton.
So on the supply chains, you've suggested that your evidence that the supply chain is fairly robust and can handle the growth that to come in the sector. However, there's also a use of the supply chain. Some aspects of projects is also shared by non-nuclear industries as well. So, what makes you certain, or can give them reassurance around the robustness of supply chains in the context and also the international context you've already alluded to?
Yeah, I think I may have given there is capability in the UK supply chain, number one. The issue that we have is the capacity of that supply chain to be able to support this programme. This is secondary, this is then compounded by other nuclear programmes and other associated industries. What we are doing as part of that process is we're not looking just at the nuclear supply chain. We cannot just look at the nuclear supply chain because they do not have the capacity to be able to meet this requirement. So what we are looking at is looking at associated industries, the oil and gas industry, the energy industry, etc., to be able to support that process of providing that capacity to be able to do so. And then in addition to that, then we look at what we need to do to develop those supply chains to support.
And I mean, if you're looking at delivering projects on time and on cost as well, if your supply chain is disrupted, that could obviously have an impact upon the cost of delivery.
Very much so. And that's one of the main principles for the Rolls-Royce SMR design. It's a factory-based product. It means that we are able to control the manufacturing processes a lot closer. But yes, absolutely. If the supply chain is disruptive, it will have an impact on the ability to be able to deliver.
But that's why you would build strength in depth in the components and make sure you've got multiple suppliers, potentially UK-focused, but also backup supply chain with that strength in the long term.
And second, and
Finally,
from me, is about you're obviously part of the SMR competition. So if Rolls-Royce were successful, how soon would we then see actual deployment and rollout of?
So the bit that we're in control of is the construction of the power station itself, and that is 5.1 years for the first of a kind, coming down to 4 and eventually 3 years will be the eventual aim. So 5 years is what we're in control of and know how to do. The earlier stage, the planning process, 4, 5, 6 years, that's the bit we're not in control of and is open to a range of factors. But essentially you're looking at early to mid 2030s for first power if you can't make any changes to the existing way that we deliver planning permissions in the UK.
Excellent. We've got about 8 minutes left roughly. We've got Mark Garney, Barry Gardner, Mark Hendrick and Mark Bosey. Mark Garner.
3 quick questions. So financial, as I remember it, you've had 240 million from the government, 260 million from the consortium, which you lead, or is that the other way around?
210 from UK government and 280 from investors.
You've had £500 million so far. When you start rolling this out, the first question is where is further investment going to come from? Do you need government money, or can you get it from the markets, which is
sorry, apologies.
Go on.
Both. So as part of the Great British Nuclear competition, they are talking about co-investment. So that will be a similar match structure. So we do believe we could go and secure further capital from the market.
Fantastic. So, and then what is the cost of the electricity you expect to be produced compared with current traditional nuclear?
I'm going to give you a vague answer, so I apologise. It's 40 to 75 pounds per megawatt hour, 2019 economy, but it depends what structure if you're using a contract for difference or regulated assets.
40 to 75 is quite good. So that's below the current strike price of electricity.
Correct.
That is very encouraging, actually. And then you also made a point about the global markets. You're in competition with the French and US manufacturers of this. Is the globe not big enough to have more than one manufacturer?
There will certainly be more than one. There'll be multiple SMR technologies, and there should be. There are multiple reactor types of large projects at the minute. You want strength in depth, and we expect more than one to succeed in the UK. There'll probably be 2, likely 2 selected by Great British Nuclear. That's good. That introduces competition in the long term, so that's a good outcome.
And you're good at this. You do nuclear submarines at the moment, which I realise you can't cross-reference, and you've got the space stuff going on as well.
It's a high barrier to entry market. We have significant experience. We're ready to go.
Barry Gardner.
No, it's been answered by Mark.
Excellent, thank you. Mark Hendrick.
A question which won't surprise the panel, given that I've met with them before, or 2 of them at least, about fuel. Clearly, you mentioned earlier about content, UK content in production, and clearly you want to get that as high a percentage as possible, obviously to meet national requirements. What happens though when you're over the line? And I think when we discussed it last time, Alastair, you sort of hinted at, well, given the economic considerations, which may be further down the line, you might be looking at fuel from abroad, for example, from France or EDF. Clearly, I've got a British interest in that. I've got Springfields on my doorstep. How do you see that panning out?
Let me start, and Richard perhaps take over. So we have placed a contract for the design of our fuel with Springfields and with Westinghouse. So there is a UK fuel route being developed for our solution. Is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, and we've also placed it comes back to the comment with regards to security, and we've also placed a design contract with a French organisation as also that fuel process. We are looking for either way, the manufacture of that fuel to be in the UK.
You're back in both horses at the moment, but further down the track, how do you see things panning out if EDF are producing it cheaper?
Well, that's a consideration that will form again part of the Great British Nuclear process and the selection, but there is clearly an intent to maximise UK content. UK's got significant experience in fuel and is investing further in its domestic fuel supply, strengthening Urenco, strengthening Springfields, which is extremely welcome.
Excellent. Mark Bosey.
Government's only yesterday, I think, announced a desire to have generation take place closer to where the energy is used. Where would you anticipate being good sites for SMRs? Is it replacement of the existing nuclear fleet, or is there a possibility that this technology can be used in other locations, in which case what sort of locations, and in which case then what are the planning issues that we spoke about with the last panel?
Yeah, so in the first wave, we are certainly looking at existing nuclear sites. You've got extremely strong public support at those sites, whether it's, Moorside or Wilver or Albury down in the southwest. So your starting point would clearly be the already identified nuclear sites. That's your short term, and you could put multiple SMRs on those sites. Medium term, you could look to identify new sites. I mean, Teesside is a good example where you've got significant energy intensive demand. And it's a non-nuclear site. So if you could make the case, and government is seeking to go that way with the alternative siting consultation that is underway at the minute. So they are seeking to open up new areas for SMR deployment. So in the medium term, that would certainly be our thinking.
So non-nuclear sites are potentially...
and government's consulting on that premise at the minute.
And you wouldn't face any planning problems there?
So you would go through the planning process in the same way you would if you were building a gas project or a large onshore wind project.
And you spoke about 5 years, reducing down to 4 or 3 from order. If you had to add on a planning application, by how much longer would that be extended?
Yeah, so I mean, rough order of magnitude, we're talking about around 10 years for first of a kind, including your planning and to your first power, and we would want to bring that down from our pace increasing as we deliver units and planning processes becoming more streamlined in time, so that it's not taking you longer to plan and consent than it is to build.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. You plan to displace gas?
I think our view on gas is that gas is going to have a role, but it's obviously, if you can maximize...
The government's now looking at gas in 20 years' time. Would you not be there in 20 years' time?
Yeah, so nuclear could be displacing gas in the 2030s.
I mean, one of the themes that's coming over from both of you, from British ports and from yourselves, is the UK government can't really be passive with this. I mean, I'm passive with market signals. It's got to get active in the project with you. Is that a fair assessment of what you're saying?
Yeah, I think that is fair, and I think that's recognising that 10 years ago there was a developer-led market in nuclear, i.e. go and spend £1 to £2 billion and fingers crossed it'll happen. That failed.
Is that the George Osborne firing gun that failed?
No, that was the large nuclear project that failed. So now government recognises that they do need to be part of the solution alongside government, and that's where you get into the Great British Nuclear Procurement.
We've got a couple of minutes left, and they'll both be mindful of each other, Barry Gardner and Mark Garnier. Barry.
Can you flesh out what Mr. Thomas was asking about skills, and whether there are any bottlenecks in the skills capacity that we need, and what delays they might create for you?
Most probably are some bottlenecks in the skills, because the nuclear industry has not been in existence to the state that we want it to be in the future. We are going to need to employ for the factory I'm talking about, and there'll be more for the site, but for the factory we're going to need to employ, as I said, in the region of 330 employees, and they will be all highly skilled individuals, predominantly in welding and non-destructive examination. They'll need to, from an apprentice scheme, which we want to obviously move into, we want to be seeing that throughput of talent coming through on a regular basis to sustain that number of employees within the region. And so we need to really set up those established training facilities and partners within region for us to deliver that.
Sorry, let me try and push you a bit. Are there engineering, high-level STEM skills that there is a dearth of in this country, and who are you competing against, given that this is not just about nuclear, there are going to be huge demands from the rest of the push to net zero? What are you asking government to do? What are the recommendations we should be making to government about the skills that are required to ensure those bottlenecks don't delay delivery?
So we're aligning ourselves to some of the national programmes to deliver nuclear skills and engineering skills, and we're putting commitments forward in terms of the numbers that we want to see come through the graduate and apprenticeship route. Okay. So a lot of those
government.
So a lot of those schemes are in place and are supported by other large companies, so it's really a case of making sure that we keep pushing on that and that they deliver what they're intended to.
Thank you. Mark Gunning.
Alastair, very quickly, you were talking about going to Tyneside and locating on existing sites. If you go to Tyneside, is that because you agree with the idea of regional pricing? Would that help? And the second question is, are you confident that if you would go and follow the regional pricing where there's a demand, that you'll get access to the grid?
It's not a regional pricing push. So the first sites we would go to would be existing nuclear sites where they've got grid connection, so you're reducing the burden and the demand on new grid requirements. We are looking at energy intensives particularly, so data centres. So it's very difficult to build data centres in the UK at the minute because they don't have the power demand. So are there locations like Albury is a good example, and the neighbouring Berkeley site, where you could catalyse significant investment in data centres rather than the regional pricing aspect?
You're going to go where the demand is. Fantastic.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you very much. Rolls-Royce, and we'll get you out as smoothly as we got you in, and we will have Siemens. Thank you very much. Got it. Right.
What is ABP?
Siemens evidence starts.
You need one. We need that one. Need that one.
Trainees and graduates.
You do.
You remember when George Osborne did that? He did like a Faraday. He did a Faraday.
When you did an investment bank, luckily you keep it.
I'm Darren.
Oh, they're not right.
You started this website 4 years with my hand.
I'll have them in the middle of that.
It's
Darrington, right?
Thank you, sir.
It would revolutionise energy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right. For this nuclear thing. Good morning, Siemens Energy. And in many ways, it was the quality of your evidence which was exceptional, which has resulted in us having the format we've got this morning. But we'll carry on as we are with the format we have. Ask you to introduce yourselves and then blast on.
Good morning, Andrew Elmes. I look after net zero business development for Siemens Energy.
Excellent.
Matthew Knight, I'm Head of Government Affairs and Understanding the Market for Siemens Energy.
Fantastic.
My name's Darren Davidson and I'm the Head of Siemens Energy for UK and Ireland. Maybe I'll take the lead on just giving an overview of our evidence.
When you go.
Right, so I've introduced colleagues. So Matthew and Andrew are responsible for government affairs. So just like to say a few words about introduction about our business. So Siemens Energy is one of the leading energy technology providers globally. We're now a completely separate business to Siemens AG. And we employ around 97,000 staff globally. And we're, size-wise, we're around 31 billion business globally. So we manufacture, install and service a wide range of products that underpin the energy system. Wind turbines, grid transmission, gas and steam turbines, transformers, interconnectors. We're also interested in technologies such as carbon capture, energy storage and hydrogen. Our business in the UK has been present for over 150 years. We employ 6,000 people across the UK in sites in England and Scotland, including our grid centre of excellence in Manchester, our service centre for offshore industry in Aberdeen, our gas and steam turbine service facility in Newcastle, the UK's only remaining gas turbine manufacturing plant in Lincoln, and our Siemens Gamesa wind turbine factory in Hull. Siemens Energy is already a big investor in the UK supply chain. We've spent 500 million in Hull, creating more than 1,000 new jobs. And we've invested tens of millions across the rest of the footprint in this country. There is a huge opportunity for us and businesses across the country to invest more, delivering a more resilient supply chain and creating thousands of new jobs. But we have to recognise that there's a massive competition internationally for investment, including within Siemens Energy. Many countries are looking to decarbonise at the same time as us. All of them are competing for space in the global supply chain, and all want to build up their domestic supply chain capacity. Supply chain businesses like Siemens Energy will respond to long-term consistent signals about the UK's commitment to decarbonise energy and a strong pipeline of future work. And also if the UK is a good place to do business. We've demonstrated that with our recent investment in Hull. So our industry will also respond positively to an industrial strategy which provides a roadmap for skills and investments out to 2035 and 2050. So I think we need to look back as well. Up to now, I think the UK has done well. We should be particularly proud of our record when it comes to the development of offshore wind, the departure of coal from an energy perspective. But we firmly believe now we need to step up that pace. So we need clear and consistent direction when it comes to policy for long-term planning. We need the government to be flexible and rapid in making decisions, particularly when it comes to transforming the grid and also hydrogen. And we need the government to provide targeted financial support if it wants the UK supply chain to grow. A good example is last year's Contract for Difference auction round 5 failed for offshore wind. Changes in AR6, including the extra budget, are most welcome and will secure between 3 and 6 gigawatts in this auction round. But more than 10 gigawatts of projects are ready to be built. To reach the goals and for industry to invest, we need to see the targets out to 2035 and not through individual auction rounds. And we need to have the confidence that future auction rounds will deliver that 7 gigawatts of aspiration of new capacity every single year. In grid, again, we've made some improvements. The Windsor review was positive, but now it needs to be implemented at pace. And if we want to help the supply chain, we should learn from countries like Germany that have offered a 10-year programme for projects in grid. The UK also has huge advantages when it comes to carbon capture and hydrogen. But we need to move quickly. We need to move quickly to get those first-of-a-kind projects implemented and over the line. We also appreciate the Giga Fund. The Giga Fund is welcome, but we now need to see the money being allocated and investments supported in context of the industrial strategy. I think we all accept this is incredibly challenging as well. It is. We know that. But we truly believe that this is a real opportunity of a lifetime for us. We have the chance to cut emissions, lower energy bills, increase our energy security, but at the same time give people rewarding and lifelong careers in the energy sector. I personally started my own career 35 years ago in this sector as an apprentice, and I'm proud today that we continue to, with our passion for apprenticeships, we have over 300 people in our 6,000 strong team. We want to continue to do that, and we're passionate about creating high-value jobs in this dynamic sector. We all accept decarbonisation is hard, and we all accept that building up the domestic supply chain is difficult. But if we are all committed and decisive, I truly believe we can all do very well.
Excellent. There's a lot of good stuff there. Now, before I take from Barry Gardner, you mentioned pipeline, and pipeline is quite important in a theme that's gone through this morning, and the long-term consistent signals. You mentioned in your evidence your initial investment in Hull in 2010 was going to be quite a large investment, but it scaled back between various announcements government made between 2010 and 2014, and it reduced several times because of political signals. Yeah. So what I'm driving at is, what are you wanting governments to do and then not to do?
I mean, I think it's clear. I think if you visit Hull, you see Hull. I think we've invested heavily with ABP ports. Yeah. To build that capability in Hull. And I think that all comes from the visibility of the projects that we see, the pipeline of those projects. And I think maybe I'll ask Andrew to contribute, because you were part of that journey of building that investment.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was lucky enough to be part of the project team that built Hull and that has since gone on to build offshore wind farms that have used the blades that come out of our factory in Hull. So Hull wasn't built on the back of the Contract for Difference. It was built before that as part of a mechanism called feeder that gave certainty to a number of projects.
What did politics do to make you less certain between 2010 and 2014 that made the millions you are spending decrease?
There was, and Matthew was part of that, so you can give some more of the detail and we can follow up with written on that. But effectively it was a reduction in commitment from 2010 through to 2014 of what the UK was willing to
These
buy.
words were costing millions of pounds.
These words, they cost us on size of our commitment, because our commitment reduced accordingly. We started off looking at whether it was going to be a nacelle factory, even towers, as well as a blade factory. And then the ultimate decision in 2014 was to stick with a blade factory. And we put our nacelle factory elsewhere, and it ended up in Germany.
Because of political pronouncements. Barry Gardner.
You spoke of in your evidence of the problems with the rollout of the grid and the problems we have there and the bottleneck of connectivity. I think we've got to create as much grid in the next, 6 years as we've done, 4 times as much as we've done the last 30 years altogether. And you said it's unlikely that every country will get what it needs on time, which I think is a great understatement. Yeah. What is it that you suggested Germany had done in its 10-year project program we need to learn from?
From a grid transformation perspective, they were very clear on their visibility of their plans for the next 10 years, and they awarded contracts. Tenant, who's the system operator in Germany, presented that plan as to what they wanted to do and awarded contracts for a full duration, whereas what we see is like single type contracts for a project.
The NISO, the new National Energy Systems Operator, is going to be coming forward with their strategic plan. What representations are you making to ensure that that sort of programmatic development and rollout is part of that plan?
I would say, from a system operator perspective, we're very heavily active in some of the HVDC projects and the grid restoration projects. So we work with the system operators to provide that. And I think maybe ask Matthew to...
Andrew, I'll add one comment on that the system is slightly different in Germany to the UK. In the UK, a developer develops the whole project, including their offshore transmission assets. Netherlands and Germany, they have at times taken a different approach where effectively it's kind of a more plug and play for the developers to do the wind farm that plugs into the offshore connection. So that has allowed the German government and TenneT to do a mass procurement approach to that, whereas in the UK it is project by project.
So we need a recommendation from this committee, in the light of your evidence, is that we need to have programs, not projects.
Yeah, I think I agree with that statement, but I think it's more that visibility of the pipeline. Maybe if we take that back to sort of offshore wind, we need the visibility that our aspiration is to get to that 7 gigawatts every year for the next sort of 10 years. Not individual auction rounds.
You can build the port facilities and do the rest of it and not rely on the
Final, just short question here. You said quite rightly a CFD is not the answer to everything, and it's the wrong answer, you said, for less mature technologies such as green hydrogen. What is the right answer for green hydrogen?
Maybe ask Matthew to take that.
Well, we wrote to the Energy Minister in February 2020 to say what we suggested was the right answer. The point's already been made this morning that the sooner you can get a pipeline of work going in your country, the bigger your chances of attracting a supply chain. And back in 2020, no one had built any hydrogen projects anywhere in Europe. It was a blank sheet of paper. We urged the UK government to move forward with a quick and simple scheme which could have been based on either tax credits or just a very basic sort of premium for hydrogen. Instead of that, the UK government has chosen to develop the enduring regime, which we will need, but it's taken 4 years to do that. And just before Christmas, the government announced the first project in selected CFD contracts. They've yet to sign those contracts, and none of them has yet awarded a contract to an electrolyser manufacturer. Meanwhile, in Europe, projects have gone ahead, and that's why 16 manufacturers have announced factories in Europe in the last 3 years. The UK has yet to get out of the starting blocks.
Well, the UK government...
That you've just outlined our question to the Minister this afternoon. Thank you very much.
So while the UK government pondered, your continental government's gone on and built.
Yes. Now, every country has its own issues, and no place is perfect. The UK missed an opportunity to be right out in front. We have some tremendous advantages for hydrogen in this country, geology and geography, where the wind is and where the storage can be. It's still not too late, but there is a much greater value in getting those first-of-a-kind projects away and then following them up with a pipeline of projects and building a supply chain from the start.
Briefly, why couldn't you just do that as a company? I mean, you're a big company. You've been 31 billion globally. You've 97,000 employees. You've 6,000 in the UK. Why don't you just go on and do it rather than...
Well, we have done it. We've announced a factory in Berlin because that's where...
You needed the government. You needed a government.
No, we needed a pipeline of projects. It's very interesting. I drew the map a year ago to show where all these European factories are. Now, if you were just saying Europe is a big market, where's the cheapest places to manufacture, you would put your factories probably in Eastern Europe. But in fact, it's really noticeable. The factories are in Denmark, in Germany, in France, in the countries that have come up with projects first. So these...
And funding for the projects?
The first location for the supply chain is where the projects start first. Once you've got an established industry, which wind or grid or other things are, then you have a different question, which is where do you build a second factory? And that's a much larger decision and more of a beauty contest.
Listen, you chair the government's hydrogen working group.
Yep.
Why the hell didn't they take any notice of it?
The sequence of events, we wrote to them about this in February 2020. I became chair of the working group in 2023, I think.
Yeah, but
that was certainly after they realised they got
maybe to address that point, I think this is the Hydrogen Delivery Council. There's some very, very good work that's being done there. There's a real ambition to try to get momentum on that. And I think, from a HAR1 perspective, I think there has been some success, but it's very, very small. It's 125 megawatts of hydrogen. The second round, HAR2, is 825 megawatts. And there's a real desire to get going. But as Matthew says, not one of the projects is achieved FID yet. And I think there is an ambition to get them there. But I think if you look at the scale of what we're trying to do across all of the energy transition, they're all stories like this. They're all stories that we're not getting going. And if you ask me about sort of hydrogen, there's a very clear view of HAR1, there's a very clear view of HAR2, but there's not a real defined roadmap as to what we're going to be doing in the next 3, 4, 5 years, which will allow companies like ourselves to look at the UK market. And again, we're in competition with all the other countries who are doing energy transition. For us to be able to from a Siemens energy perspective, to say the UK market is the right place to invest. And that's maybe what we've probably heard from the other two people today is quite similar.
Can I understand something here, just very briefly? So you went to Germany. Now, your private company, were you doing a sort of a paper round, a milk round, looking for the best subsidy and went to the country that was giving you the best support and subsidy? Big Siemens of 31 billion. Government subsidies are still important.
For the supply chain.
Germany was the country that was most active in hydrogen. Now, our company is headquartered in Berlin. We had
What was the government doing to be active in hydrogen? Was it government or was this...
The German government was supporting real projects to get underway.
With a subsidy?
Yes, with a variety of different subsidies.
Yeah, I would also say that the example on grid, example Germany, they had that long-term vision, that 10-year vision, which allowed...
On a new thing like green hydrogen was where the subsidy was what started the cluster, in effect. It wasn't market forces, it was where the government designed and used a system brain and thought, if we put money in here, we'll create a cluster and then we don't need to subsidize because we'll now have it anchored, where the anchor gets dropped. So the subsidy was used to drop the anchor.
That's right. And last year, the UK ran its first HAR1 round, and that was great, but it was one of 6 countries in Europe that had processes for awarding subsidies for hydrogen last year. But there are already projects built in Germany and Denmark and the Netherlands and other places.
Marconi, you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you. So this is really, really interesting stuff, and it's sort of slightly carrying on from this, but it's a little bit of a history lesson. I can't remember whether it was Darren or Andrew who was talking about the government backpedaling between 2010 and 2014. I just would like a bit more flavour of what was going on then. That was the backpedalling that got us to where we are now. You want to tell?
Yeah, just to explain. So in about 2009, there was something called the Strategic Environmental Assessment for offshore energy, which included offshore wind. That talked about 30 gigawatts of offshore wind, and Gordon Brown and Ed Miliband at the time were talking about 30 gigawatts by 2020. Now that was maybe unrealistically optimistic, but it was, that was the aspiration. A year or so later, we were talking about 20 gigawatts by 2020 because
it's under the new government.
A year or so later, we were talking about cutting the green crap.
Yes, and in 20...
We should be interrupting with swearing.
Steady on.
I'm just saying to clarify the situation.
He's trying to move things on speedily. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Energy isn't green.
Sorry. There's a tomfoolery going on.
In 2012, we had, I think it was called the Offshore Wind Roadmap, and that gave an envelope by 2020 of...
Can you remind me who was the Secretary of State at the time?
There were various secretaries of state.
No.
Reay and Amber Rudd.
Was it? But it wasn't
before their time. Wasn't it?
Was it Vince Cable? Because it was part of.
It was Ed Davey.
It was Ed Davey who did
yes,
it. Yeah.
Which at the time, one of the powerful things about the early days of the coalition was the fact that we had two parties represented in the department, and they were both very much on the same page. That broke down later in the coalition, and there was a point, I don't know whether I should mention an individual, but there was a speech that killed 1,000 jobs, is what it was known as in the industry.
It's worth knowing.
John Hayes.
But
just what happened was the ambition went down and down. It became I think it was 11 to 18 was what was stated, but we know that that document actually said 9 to 15 the day before it was published. The industry and the government were doing a dance. Government wouldn't commit to the industry until the industry could commit to reducing costs. The industry couldn't invest to reduce costs until it had a pipeline of work. We found a way through that. We had a collaborative process called the Offshore Wind Industry Council, and in 2013 that came up with the final investment decision enabling contracts, and that led to us announcing our factory in the spring of 2014. So we found a way through.
Because I think we're going to
this is really helpful.
More time, but I think in all respect, I think we're here today to really look at what we need to do to transform the future.
I completely agree.
On that,
well, I was just going to say my history lesson is not really about apportioning blame.
I understand that,
but actually it's really important because there are lessons that could be learned by how government fails to.
I think, as I mentioned in my delivery notes, there's some real successes as well. We're sometimes very hard on us.
Can I probe you a little bit on that, Dan? You said something quite interesting when you were speaking about the 3 to 6 gigawatts that CFD round 6, I think, is going to deliver. But you're ready to build 10.
Yeah.
Now, do you want that 10 to be green-lighted now, or does that give you a sort of a confidence that in the CFD round 7, presumably, that there's more going to come? I mean, talk me through that.
I'll let Matthew talk through that, but I mean, from my perspective, I think if you look at industry and the wind industry, I think there was a desire to deliver more in auction round 6. I believe that we need to getting back on track. We had a disastrous auction round 5 where we got 0.
So 6 should have been bigger to compensate for 5.
Yeah. So the bigger number needs to compensate what we've missed in auction round 5. Yeah. But I think there's a belief from a market perspective, or from a growth in wind and getting to our targets, that we do need to be getting auction rounds with 7 to 10 gigawatts of power. And whilst it's welcome, we're not going to achieve that, but I'm going to ask Andrew to add to that.
And that's if we're aiming for the 50 gigawatts by 2030, then you need to allow, say, 3 to 4 years for those projects to be built. So you need to be auctioning all of that 50 gigawatts by in the next couple of auction rounds. So that takes you to CFD 8 at the latest. CFD 6, sorry, just to kind of get your point, was a catch-up of CFD 5 because there was an annual auction and we lost all volume, the 5 gigawatts that was there for CFD 5. Nobody bid, so we had to catch that up. CFD6 has also been a rebid of some of the CFD4 projects, where the costs have come down, but of course post-inflation regime, the prices have gone up. So the CFD strike prices have come down, but the costs have gone up, and therefore some of those projects are rebidding in. That's taking away some of that budget volume. So when you have that, catch-up CFD5, making better some of the CFD4 projects, and the projects that are now ready for CFD6, all of that volume is more than 10 gigawatts ready to be, and the budget just isn't there for those to get away, which is why we're saying it'll get at most 3 to 6 gigawatts.
So just before taking my pause, you're saying that anything that meets the strike prices given in that round should be included?
Well, it's a competitive auction, therefore
Yes,
there is a strike price, and then within that you compete in order to get...
Because if you have a bigger round, then you're taking in those who are less competitive, you could argue to be...
The budget is set according to how much volume the government thinks is going to go in, so it's quite an iterative process.
Yep.
Knowing that there are 10 gigawatts there, of which some of it is caught up, improving CFD4 business cases, catching up CFD5, and getting on with the momentum towards 2030 targets, we need a budget for that, double the budget that we've got now.
The message we're getting from all of our witnesses about the need for a pipeline, I just want to ask about skills and the ability of the workforce. If we get that pipeline, have we got the college infrastructure to bring technicians, particularly with the skills to deliver at pace?
Yeah. We're part of the Green Jobs Delivery Group, so we sit in that group and we contribute. And I think there's some really good work that's been done about sort of future apprenticeships and future training programs. So that is a positive. But the scale we need to move forward with, trying to get an additional 500,000 people into the industry, that we really need to try and do something really dramatic.
Presumably, intending apprentices need to know that there's a future in the industry. In the same way as to investors we can do.
Yeah, I mean, I think the energy sector is a wonderful place to work, and I think if the right opportunities, people stay there for the rest of their lives. And I think we really need to be making it as attractive as possible for people to see that as a career choice for them to be in the energy sector, both from apprenticeships but from a degree perspective as well. How can we incentivise people to come into our sector?
Have the colleges got the capacity to deliver?
Do you mind if I give a little, by way of answering, a little case study of what we've done in Hull? And you heard from Andy earlier about the port infrastructure in the factory. What we also did, and the third part of that programme was the most impressive part, was about how we staff the factory. You start off, you can't go and recruit 1,000 people who know how to make a wind turbine blade. So that started off with the technical colleges, the university, and recruiting 97%, I think, from the Humber region. To get 1,000 people in just 2 years, we recruited and trained people to start making blades in Hull. And the point of that is, if you give the pipeline and if you give the certainty, industry, private sector will respond.
Yeah. Okay.
That is a vignette, that is a case study of the energy transition right there in a post-coal industrial setting of the Humber, where we've turned that into a blade manufacturing.
Maybe to add to that point as well, I think you've heard pipeline today, you've heard predictability of pipeline. But I think if you look at that projection of what the work looks like in the future allows us to take a longer term view as to how many people we need in Hull to support the market as well.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Barry Gardner, you want to bring this to?
I'm really keen to get the figures that you just said, Mr. Elmes. You said that the target was 50 by 2030.
Yes.
The
catch-up from 4 was how much?
Gas has got to fill it.
Rebid from 4? 54 got away 7 gigawatts of capacity. However, a number of those projects are able to rebid into CFD6 because of this post-inflation cost issue. And some 1.3 gigawatts of projects we understand are going to do that. I can name those projects, we can follow up.
That was 1.3.
So that's the 1.3. So that is now, if you think, diluting the budget that's available because they're going back in for a second bite of the cherry, which is kind of eligible and fine.
The rebid from 5 as well.
Rebid from 5 is
that?
Some 5 gigawatts, say. It was 5 gigawatts that was eligible for CFD5. Whether they all go back in again, we'll see. And then we've got a number of projects that are going in for CFD6, which we don't know exactly who's bidding yet. Those developers will make the case. We have a sort of our own forecast. It could be up to 14 gigawatts that could go into that auction because a project called Berwick Bank could get consent. Between 14 and we think 10 is the range of projects that could be eligible to build in CFD6. And right now, there's more than 10 that have their consent that could go now.
And you were saying that really we need to... So,
you'd have to take the 1.3 and potentially the 5 off that 14 to see what's genuinely new here.
I think we have 15 gigawatts of installed units in offshore now.
Yeah.
I think it's bridging that gap to get to that 50 gigawatts aspiration. How you bridge that 35 gigawatts,
and that's in the next 6 years.
Yes.
Yeah. So.
And if auction round's giving you 3 gigawatts, then.
But you were saying we now need to be seeing 7 to 10 in the next couple of years because of the delays in order to get them in.
Because they need a construction time in order to hit your 2030 target.
Thank you very much.
And I think partly, sorry, just to add, that's also why we need a target beyond 2030. That's not a long time in construction period. We need 2035, 2040, up to...
And that's the pipeline.
That's pipeline, exactly.
And back to the pipeline, which is a big, strong message to the government and everybody else around about in this area. Can I thank you all very much for being here this morning, especially Siemens, and again I reiterate how good your evidence was and how influential you were in this morning's structure. Thank you. Rolls-Royce, SMR, thank you too, and Associated British Ports, thank you too. It's been a very lively session, informative session, and a lot to go with. Thank you all very much. Order. Right, I'm out.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding has ended.